Growing up as part of both middle school and high school, like everyone else, I had to take gym class. And for me, because I'm such a gifted athlete, that was no problem. It's fake news right there. Anyway, I'm grateful, actually, though, that they had, and I suppose they still do have physical education as part of the curriculum when you're going through middle or junior high and high school. I'm grateful for that for a couple of reasons. First of all, it's good to give kids something physically to do as part of their day, to burn off some calories, to burn off some steam, to do physical exertion. That's positive. But the other thing that I'm grateful for about PE classes is that it exposed me to sports or to processes about sports that otherwise I would have not known. And so there are plenty of things in terms of athletic sports that you may never decide that you're going to be a part of a team, but at least you'll have an appreciation. These are the rules to volleyball, or these are all the rules to baseball, or whatever it is. So that's kind of helpful. Even with some stuff that's pretty basic, like even within track and field. I remember, for example, in junior high, we were doing this track and field section, and we were doing relay races. Now, relay races, that sounds pretty simple. I mean, it's not very complicated. You've got a number of people that are part of a team, and you have your turn, somebody else has their turn. But something that I had not experienced before was this whole practice of running with a baton. And so if you've never played track or field, or whether you have or not, likely you're aware of this. You've got 4 legs to a race in a relay race. And so whether you're the first, the third, the fourth, whatever it is, you've got your section of the race that you're going to run. And the first leg of the race, that runner in that lane has the baton. And if you're number 2, they're going to be passing that baton off to you. And the baton pass is really important because races absolutely can be won and lost during that time. And there's more to it than just like flinging it and here you go. But there were instructions that the teacher would go through to help us make sure that there was this smooth transition. And so if you're the person that's receiving the baton, you've got this transition zone where you need to receive the baton and get it before you get to another line. And so if you're the one that's receiving it, you've got some responsibilities. You're going to stick your hand out and you're going to have your fingers extended so that the runner with the baton has a target, that they have something to actually place that in. They're going to begin running, and so that they're already starting to get up to speed so that they don't have to stop to be able to hand this off to you, so that there's constant motion and movement. And then the one that is passing off the baton, they want to make sure that they are actually putting it not near your hand, but in your hand. In both of these areas, there are responsibilities to ensure that you have a smooth transition. And that matters because races are won and lost many times in that transition. I hope that the metaphor is not lost on you, that as not just people, but as followers of Christ, this that we are doing, this experience of living and this experience of following Jesus is something that is done, not in isolation, but it's done as part of a team. And you have your leg of the race, and whether you think about it regularly or not, at some point, you and I check out from here. We have an expiration date. You're aware of this. Many times, however, though, we forget about that, and we overlook the fact that I am going to be passing the baton off to someone else. The responsibilities that I am currently responsible for, the tasks that are currently mine, the opportunities that currently have my name, they're going to have someone else's name on it in the future, and there is going to be a transition. Either the baton will be taken from me, or I can pass off the baton. Hopefully it is that what you would want is not just a transition, a forced transition, but rather a smooth transition. We're thinking about that today as we land the plane of a series that we started 8 weeks ago, looking at the life of Moses, a series that I've called In Transit, where we're thinking about not just going, but growing through the seasons of life. And one of the realities with respect to the seasons of life is that there is the descent. There's the winter stage. There is the final season of life. And at some point, it is that you're going to get there, or you are there, and you need to be thinking about now or then this experience of passing off the baton. How can you do that smoothly? That's what we're thinking about today. And the specific question we want to think about is this. excuse me, as a follower of Christ, what can I do to ensure that there is a smooth transition to the next generation? As a follower of Christ, what can I do to ensure that there is a smooth transition to the next generation? Look with me in your Bibles today to Deuteronomy chapter 30. Deuteronomy chapter 30. We're going to begin with verse 1, and we're picking this up midstream, this lengthy discourse from Moses, his final address to the people. And he says in verse 1, when all these things happen to you, the blessings and curses I have set before you, and you come to your senses while you are in the nations where the Lord your God has driven you, and you and your children return to the Lord your God and obey him with all your heart and your soul by doing everything I'm commanding you today, then he will restore your fortunes, have compassion on you, and gather you again from all the peoples where the Lord your God has scattered you. Even if your exiles are at the farthest horizon, he will gather you and bring you back from there. The Lord your God will bring you into the land your fathers possessed, and you will take possession of it. He will cause you to prosper and multiply you more than he did your fathers. The Lord your God will circumcise your heart and the hearts of your descendants, and you will love him with all your heart and your soul so that you will live. The Lord your God will put all these curses on your enemies who hate and persecute you. Then you will again obey him and follow him and his commands that I am commanding you today. The Lord your God will make you prosper abundantly in all the work of your hands. You know what? I have been reading, because I was reading it and I thought, well, that's strange. We're going to go to verse 11. I gave you the first 10 verses. You ever do something stupid? What's that like? It only took me 10 verses to get there. Verse 11. This command that I give you today is certainly not too difficult or beyond your reach. It is not in heaven so that you have to ask who will go up to heaven, get it for us, and proclaim it to us so that we may follow it. And it's not across the sea so that you have to ask who will cross the sea, get it for us, and proclaim it to us so that we may follow it. But the message is very near you, in your mouth and in your heart, so that you may follow it. See, today I have set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. For I am commanding you today to love the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, to keep his commands, statutes, and ordinances, so that you may live and multiply, and the Lord your God may bless you in the land you're entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you do not listen, and you are led astray to bow and worship to other gods and serve them, I tell you today that you will certainly perish and will not prolong your days in the land you're entering to possess across the Jordan. I call heaven and earth as witness against you today that I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. Love the Lord your God, obey him, and remain faithful to him, for he is your life, and he will prolong your days as you live in the land the Lord swore to give to your fathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. God is using Moses and the specific things that he is saying to his people as part of his final address. I believe very much as part of giving to us an example of what it looks like to have a smooth transition from one generation, not just as a person, but specifically as a follower of Christ, to the next generation. And here's what we need to do. We need to teach people to reduce their fractions. We need to teach people to reduce their fractions. You think, wait a minute, school's out, what are we doing talking about math? Hopefully it'll make sense in just a moment. Moses, at this point, if you were to skip over to chapter 31, which I will not read that too, but in the opening opening verses of chapter 31, Moses says, I'm 120 years old. I'm 120 years old. And I'm not going to be leading you much longer. We are at the end of my leg of the journey. This is a journey that we started off with looking how God had big plans for Moses, even when he had no idea. And God was working to preserve his life, even when there was this decree that he should have been executed even as a little baby. But we saw how God worked through providence and wound up not just saving the life of Moses, but enabling him to grow up within the Pharaoh's home. As he began to grow and mature and he begins his own relationship with the Lord. By the time he is 80 years old, which is surprising that it's that much further down the road, but at 80 years old, God gives him a very specific task, and that is that he wants him to be the leader of his people, the one that God will use to lead them out of slavery in Egypt and into the promised land. And so we have given thought, and you're likely aware of all those stories and the plagues and everything else where finally, they're able to leave. They cross miraculously the Red Sea. They're marching towards the Promised Land. And we saw a couple of weeks ago what it was like when they finally get to the outskirts of the Promised Land. And the report from the 12 spies where 10 said, listen, there's no way that we can do this. And then 2 of them said, with God's help we can. He led us here, and he's wanting us to take this. If we'll lean on him, then he's going to give this to us. But the people said, oh, no, there's just no way. And because of their failures, God judged them harshly. And he said that over the next 40 years, what you're going to do is not begin the process of moving into the Promised Land. Instead, you're going to wander in what we know as the wilderness for 40 years, where everyone aged 20 and above is going to perish. Moses was given a pass, and it looked like he was going to be able to lead the children of Israel into the Promised Land. But we saw last week that foolishness is not something, and hastiness is not something that is reserved for youth. And in the winter years of life, he acted hastily, and he acted foolishly, and he disobeyed God, and because of that, he's been told, you're not going to lead them into the Promised Land. This is the end of the road. And so what we have is this lengthy address of Moses. He is aware, I'm at the end, and he is preparing the people for this transition that is going to take place where he is no longer going to be their leader, but Joshua is. And in the chapters before what we read, and all the way through chapter 33 of Deuteronomy, Moses is going on at considerable length, giving them a whole variety of reminders. Remember to do this. Make sure that you do this. All of these things are important. This is the last chance I've got to say all this to you, so listen to me in this. So he is doing that, but I really believe everything it is that he says to them is important. But what we find in the second half of chapter 31, effectively, I believe, creates a synopsis of all of that. And so he's 120 years old, and he says, starting in verse 12, or actually verse 11, he says, what I'm sharing with you today is not something that's too difficult. It's not beyond your reach to grasp. That's helpful. Right? It's nice. This is not neuroscience. This is not rocket science. This is not calculus. He said, what I'm saying to you is very simple. Beyond that, this is not some sort of message that you have to get Indiana Jones to help you find the location of where it is. This is a message, and this is a command, and these are instructions that are easily understandable, that are available, that you don't have to go up to heaven to get them, and it's very near you. And the message, he says in verse 15, is this: see, today I have set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. I've set before you life and prosperity, death and adversity. Everything that Moses has said up to this point, if you go back and read lots of these instructions, he was reminding them of some very clear boundaries that God had erected, things that God wanted them to do, and ways that he wanted to operate in this situation, in that situation. And there are lots of individual details that are given, but he's essentially saying, listen, let me just summarize it. Let me summarize it this way, that God, the one who made you with plan, purpose, and intent, has communicated that there are some ways to operate in this life that are appropriate, that are in bounds, and there are ways that are inappropriate, that are out of bounds. And if you take seriously what I have said and pay attention to those boundaries, I'm telling you that I can bless that type of life, that I can work in that type of circumstance, and things are going to go better for you, not just in life, but as a follower of Jesus, by taking seriously what I have said. On the flip side, if you decide I'm going to color outside the lines, I'm going to make up my own rules, and I'm going to do my own thing, regardless of what the one who made me said, he's saying that things are not going to go well, that there is going to be real and catastrophic problems that you're going to experience. Sometimes it is in life that we get to the point where we feel like life is very complicated. And one of the things that as you go from teenage into early adulthood into, honestly, like the season of life that I'm in right now, honestly stinks. It just does. Because I've got children that I am responsible for. We have aging parents that we're responsible for. There's work responsibilities, financial responsibilities. There's a lot of pulling and tugging. And like when I look at John, my 4-year-old, he doesn't have a care in the world. I'm like, he has no idea just how good he has it. But you get to the point and you realize, man, life is, it's pressing in on me. I feel like the walls are squeezing in on me. And very easily it is that we can say that life is and feels so very complicated. Among other things, we have so many, especially here in the United States, but throughout the world, we have so many choices that are available to us. And think about it, like for those that are on the cusp of or have graduated, in the scheme of things, provided you can gain acceptance, you can go to school anywhere that you want to. In terms of job or career, you can pursue anything that you want to. Where it is that you want to live, you can live wherever you want. What do you want to drive? You can drive whatever that you want. You can marry whoever you want to marry. You can decide, I'm not going to get married. There's so many things that you can decide, and there are so many choices, and there's so many options. You go get ice cream today, and it's not chocolate, vanilla, and strawberry, but even Baskin Robbins has been put to shame because there are so many variations, and we can mix all this stuff up. We can add all these toppings, and there are so many options that are available to us where we can think, and it is the case. In one sense, life is very complicated. And there are so many blessed options. And it can be overwhelming sometimes. And I realize that with respect to prosperity and with respect to technology, there's more stuff that's available to us than it was in Moses' day. But the truth is, even in their day, there were lots of options that they could make, lots of choices they could make. And Moses says, listen, I want to bring it down to this very simple language where you can get. There are a whole slew of things that God has said are in bounds, and you can choose those, and it's going to go okay. And there's a varied number of things that God has put out of bounds, and if you do choose those things, you will put yourself on the business end of God's judgment, and things will not go well for you. Let me explain it this way. Frank's got a number for you here that you'll see there, 95 over 190, so 95 1/90ths. For example, if you were to look online today and see Academy Sports is having a 95 1/90ths sale, what would you do? You might not do anything. Oh, what's a 95 1/90ths sale? Because that sounds kind of complicated. 95 out of 190, that's too many digits there. But you remember from math class that what you should do with a fraction is to what? Is to reduce it. So if you reduce 95 1/90ths, what is that? It's a half. You might go to Academy today and you say, they've got a half off sale. Everything is half off because you can get that. It brings clarity. It is helpful for you as a follower of Christ, and especially those of you that are further down the road, as you think about this process that at some point you're going to be passing the baton off to somebody else, that you need to make it very plain in a sea of choices and in a slew of opportunities that everything, ultimately, every single opportunity and every single choice is going to fall into one of two buckets. Either God has said it's okay and He will bless that, or God has said that's out of bounds and it's going to affect you adversely. Moses has gone on for chapter after chapter and verse after verse with this lengthy address, all of these specifics, but he says, let me make it very plain and simple. You can do what God says and He can bless it, or you can wave your fist at it, ignore it, and God's not going to, and it's not going to go well. We need to, as those that are followers of Christ, and regardless of the stage that we're in at this point, at some point, we are going to be passing off the baton. At some point, our time here ends, and we need to make sure that when that transition occurs, it happens smoothly. And one of the ways that we can do that is to teach people to reduce their fractions. As you are thinking about, and you're talking to your grandkids, and they're weighing all sorts of options. As you're thinking and talking to your teenage kids, as you're talking to the Sunday school class that you're dealing with, help them to reduce the fraction. Help them to see plainly that there ultimately are two choices. You can obey God or you can disobey. And as you evaluate your choices, put them in those categories and then choose well. Teach people to reduce their fractions, but there's something else that you got to do, and that's this. Watch out for the children. Watch out for the children. In verse 19, he says, listen, I call heaven and earth as witnesses against you because, he says, I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Those are the categories, A or B. Life and death, blessing, curse. Positive, negative. God can bless, God will judge. And then he says this, choose life so that you and your descendants may live. There are a couple of ways to apply this. One is to think literally in terms of what's going on contextually here. When he says to choose life, and he says, so that you and your descendants may live. God was using Moses to tell his people, listen, if you don't do what I say, it is entirely possible that what is going to happen is that there will be enemy nations that are going to come in and they're going to overtake you. And when that happens, there is going to be death. There is going to be loss of life. You don't want that. So that there's the literal meaning, but then there's the more metaphorical application, which I think has more application for us today, which is this, that if I do what God has said, and if he's put things in the acceptable category and the unacceptable, if I choose that which he said is in bounds and acceptable, things are going to go better for me. That God can bless and God can work and God can reward these various attributes and characteristics in my life. That God might be able to bless the job that I am doing. That God might be able to bless the finances that he's entrusted to my care. That God might be able to bless my family and how we operate as followers of Jesus is going to go altogether better. But he says, choose life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life so that you and your descendants may live. So there's that metaphorical application, though. It's going to go better if I do what God says. But I want you to zero in on that phrase where he says you, but notice this, he says your descendants may live. You and your descendants may live. We need to be reminded regularly that none of our choices occur in isolation. None of your choices occur in a vacuum. And what you do absolutely is and will affect those that are around you. Most directly, it's going to affect those that are in your family. It just will. Small or great, every choice that you make has some sort of rippling consequence, and sometimes significant rippling consequence. So in part, there's this encouragement to remember that what you do, it affects other people, and specifically those that are in closest proximity to you, it's going to affect them. But then he says, I want you to choose wisely so that not just it'll go well with you, but it might go well with your descendants. That it might go well with your children and those that follow them. I think that's notable because it is the case, I believe universally, that God has wired us with kind of a soft spot for kids. He just has. We've got 6 kids. Philip is our third, and Philip was born talking. And to this day, he has not ceased talking. And in fact, honestly, I remember when he was, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 years old, we're at the park, and he asked someone, "Are you a stranger?" They said yes, and then he continued to talk to them. But anyway, I don't understand this, though, but that God has wired Philip, though he's a people person, he is, and he likes to talk, and he'll talk to anybody. And somehow, some way, this joker has gotten more freebies in life than anybody I've ever seen. And I just want to think about it for a moment, even from the bluegrass perspective, which I know is how you think about things as well. But I remember a few years ago, we had gone to a festival north of, or outside of Reedsville. And they've got this merchandise table where the various groups that are performing as part of the festival, they set up their various merchandise and their tapes and CDs and hats and shirts and all this stuff. Anyway, I go over there, and I think I bought something. And so they don't cut me any slack or anything. I go over there, and I pay whatever they're saying. And so I come back and sit down. Philip disappears. He comes back, and he's got a shirt. I said, "How'd you get that shirt?" He said, "They gave it to me." How does that happen? We went to a festival in Asheville, and there was this guy that was selling capos, specifically a banjo capo, that I think they were selling for $80. $80. If I get one, it costs me $80. Philip, he gives him one. How does this work? We go see, he meets a guy on stage that was playing the banjo, and he's talking to him afterwards, and he says, "What kind of strings do you use?" And Philip says, "GHS." He said, "Here you go." Gives him a set of strings. We go to the IBMA. That's the big national thing that occurs in Raleigh in October. And there's in bluegrass, it's a big name. His name is Greg Cahill, and he plays for this particular band. Just a great banjo player. But there is, and I'm sure you're aware of this, there's a series of trading cards called bluegrass trading cards. Don't act dumb. I know you know. Your stockings were filled with them this year. But there's a series of bluegrass trading cards that have nothing but these big-name banjo players on there. Anyway, Philip meets Greg Cahill, and he says, because Philip has these cards, he says, man, I wish I forgot to bring my card so I could get you to sign it. And he says, give me your, he said, email, he gives Philip his email address. He says, email me, and I'll send you a card. So he sends him 4 autographed trading cards. It just keeps happening, and I'm like, I don't get it. He gets more free stuff than anybody I've ever seen, but I'm kind of grateful for this. Philip's 14, and now he looks more like a man and less like a kid, and because of that, the well, I believe, is drying up. The free ride is coming to an end. Do you know why? We will do for kids what we won't do for other people. Isn't that true? It just is. We've got a soft spot for them. I mean, October 31st, if a 50-year-old shows up at your house and rings the doorbell, are you going to give them candy? We will do for children what we will not do for others. We are wired to have a soft spot for them. Not only is it the case that we are wired to have a soft spot for kids, such that we, generally speaking, we care for children. Do you know the kids that I care most about? Mine. I remember some years ago, I think we just had Nathan and Andrew at this point, but Caroline's mom had said to me something about getting a physical. She said, how long has it been since you had a physical? And at that point, it had been 13 years. And I said, how long it had been? And she said, you can't do that, because you've got 2 children. So I go get a physical, not so much because of me, but because of them. And I realize that they are dependent on me. We will do for children what we may not necessarily do for ourselves. We are motivated with them in mind in ways that we may not otherwise be motivated. Notice, with that in mind, what Moses again says. I want you to reduce the fraction and realize that everything that you have in life, it's not that complicated. It goes into this bucket or that bucket. And the choices that you make, it's not just that it affects people. It's not just that it affects people that you know, but it'll affect your family. It'll affect your kids. It'll affect those that are dearest on earth to you. So choose wisely. Why do you think it is that you'll go through a neighborhood and they'll have, you've probably seen this sign repeatedly. People will put up and they'll say, drive like your kids live here. Why do they do that? It's not just that kids matter, but your kids matter. Moses knew that. God knows that. And he's saying, because of that, act that way. Let me just very simply say this. Every single one of us is going to get to the point where there's the transition zone. You're going to get to a point where your leg of the race is coming to an end. There will be a transition. There will be a transition. The question is, will there be a smooth one? Will you bow your heads with me?